is Berit Sander. I'm a business psychologist, and I work in very many different areas, anywhere where it's relevant to connect human beings with business processes.
And I am Stephane Guerraz. I am a management consultant with a background in finance, now focusing on culture, leadership, and mindset as a facilitator. And we are delighted today to welcome Andreas Nordseth as our guest. And Berit, do you want to take over?
Actually, Andreas, I would ask you to introduce yourself. What is your position? What are you doing?
So my name is Andreas Nordseth. I'm the Director General, which means the CEO of the Danish Maritime Authority, which is basically the maritime administration of Denmark, taking care of everything related to shipping. Yeah.
For how long have you been in that chair?
I've been in this chair now for a little more than 15 years. So I took up office 1st of January 2009. But I've actually been within this organization. I sort of grew up here. I came here in 1991 as a very, very technical consultant, and then started to work with more policy-related things, and then leadership and internal management, quality control, etc. And then in the end, I became deputy DG, and then 1st of January DG. Yeah.
Shipping is in your brain and in your heart.
Absolutely, it's part of my DNA. Yeah.
Yes,
yeah.
Exactly.
But I'm thinking the environment has changed a lot as well in those years.
And what we see today compared to 15 years ago is really, really a very different playing field. For instance, the best example is if you look at the green transition with the transition into a climate neutral future. In the wake of that, in order to, I mean, one thing is which is very difficult to politically decide on, what should the target be, and we actually have decided in shipping that international shipping is going to be climate neutral in 2050. But to get there, we need a lot of technology that we have never seen before. We have not invented it yet, and the best example is new fuel. So we have all been using fossil fuel. In different variations. It can be oil, but it can also be natural gas, or which we are very familiar with. But now comes ammonia, hydrogen, methanol, ethanol, blue ethanol, green. And these are technologies that both, it challenges us in every sense. It's more dangerous. There's no supply chain. Nobody knows what the price will be, so the market can really be heavily influenced. It can distort competition. So it provides a playing field that we have just seen the beginning of it, but it creates a lot of uncertainty, but also at the same time makes it extremely interesting to work in this field, because that's what I see in my team. I mean, as soon as we talk about recruiting people that you want to make shipping green, we have really, really competent people that want to chip in here and make a difference. But I would say that has really changed, has really challenged us in also being capable of coming up with new solutions on things that we have never seen before. And that's a very, very different way of thinking in our line of business. And then of course, it goes without saying, we have the geopolitical uncertainty. I mean, 4 years ago, we had good relations everywhere in the world, Russia, and everything was fine, yeah. And then, as I say, we have experienced one black swan after the other, starting with the COVID, the pandemic. 2 years later, war in Ukraine, yeah, war in Europe. Attack of Russia's attack on Ukraine. Also, that's also a black swan that has really, really had a heavy impact on everywhere in the world. And then the terrible situation in Gaza, which on shipping has a tremendous effect in the Red Sea. So we are very much influenced. But I think also looking at what happened during COVID, so for our business, it was really very important, or it made a difference for us that the whole world is very much aware that we are all dependent on shipping. That's absolutely backbone of our supply chain. So as we normally say, no shipping, no shopping. And that is that also paves the way for, everybody understands that this is a very, very important segment that we need to work with. So, and I think that's a great difference at the, looking back at 15 years ago, where it was different challenges that we were facing. That was very much about as Denmark, becoming competitive with other, making us attractive for ship owners wanting to be in Denmark. It was a very different agenda.
You still need to help Danish companies be competitive with global foes.
Absolutely. But we have seen since 2012, we have doubled the tonnage and the number of ships flying Danish flags. And we have maintained the importance of Danish shipping to the Danish economy. But I think what has happened also on sort of the strategic political agenda is that, in the times we're living in, where supply chain is really, really of strategic importance in a geopolitical sense, then being in a small country that actually controls 10% of the world supply chain, and 1 out of 6 containers in and out of US, that's Danish operated. 1 out of 5 containers in and out of China, that's Danish operated. So we sit on, Denmark is a very strong player. So that, and I think that makes it so attractive and very interesting in working with. But we are still interested in keeping this and maintaining this stronghold that we have. Yeah, absolutely.
So can I ask how you do that, and what is your role in that in practice?
We have actually some very simple, you could say, principles that we're working for. First of all, it has to be, we are firm believer in quality shipping. That means that we are not just seeking to comply with rules, but we want to make sure that shipping is safe, it's efficient, and there are good social conditions, no accidents, it doesn't influence negatively on the environment. That's really our that's part of our bond, you can say, that we are, Danish shipping is quality shipping. And then we also have this very strong principle that there has to be a global level playing field. So that means that we are firm believer, and that's why we work very hard within the UN system, where we have a UN agency called International Maritime Authority. And then on a day-to-day basis, what we do is, for instance, if you have a Danish ship that runs into problems in a country far away, they have a different interpretation of rules and regulations, so they detain the ship and say you cannot sail until something has been done. Then we come into the playing field. Then we enter into the case. We discuss. We hear the ship and say, oh, that's unfair. And then we talk to the authorities. That's just one very low practical example. So we get them off the hook, so to speak. And then, of course, if our own ships are not in compliance, then we are also working with that, and we make inspections and so on and so forth. So that's on a day-to-day basis. But we work very much on. We have this meta approach where we say, first of all, we need to have a framework that ensures that everybody needs to comply with a high set of standards, because that's the way ahead.
Listening to Andreas, to your and Stephane's focus on the very, very big picture, global, the importance of what you're doing to the Danish society. As a business psychologist, I become more and more curious. How on earth do you address and cope with, how do you address and how do you cope with this extremely high level of complexity? And also, as you describe it, you have to be ready for the unexpected. You didn't know about any black swan, and now we are having several of them. How do you cope with that kind of uncertainty and complexity?
The most important for me is, I think, is like realizing that it comes with the territory. I mean, it's part of the game. That's one thing, and I think most decision makers within the maritime world knows that, by the end of the day, there's a lot of risks and unpredictability. Things can happen that you didn't know. And actually, if you look at the way shipping is organized and the way shipping is handled and managed, controlled, is very much on sort of preparing for various scenarios. So it's part of the basic thinking in the maritime domain. But of course, still, I mean, you cannot prepare for a pandemic or lockdown. But I think mentally it's about saying, okay, that's you just need to be handled or to be able to handle unpredictability and handle black swans.
It's more like a mental state of mind that you accept the fact that you do not know when the next black swan will be there, or for 10 or 15 years there were no black swans, and then suddenly, and you don't know.
I mean, when I work with the organization and when I talk about strategy, I very often start with a sort of painting the big picture, flying very high up in a bird's perspective, and say, this is the world we're living in. These are the big things that's going on. That we have shipping. It's very global. You can borrow money everywhere. You can build your ships everywhere. We have an international framework we can work with. So, everybody has the same rules, and you can also recruit people from everywhere. So it's totally global. It's part of the DNA of shipping. It's global in its own DNA.
Yeah.
So by painting this sort of picture and saying this is mapping this is the world we are in, and then zoom down and say this is where we are, this is what we can do. I think that also helps. At least it helps me to understand. So where are we? Where are we in the playing field? So and what kind of, where are my tools? Which buttons can I turn? What can I work with?
I came to the wording. It's calm alertness.
Yes.
And you're also saying that you are representing some calm alertness, but also your organization. How do you support your organization, your system, to be able to cope with what you just described, all this complexity and things that are unforeseen? What are you focused on leading your organization?
What I do is more like continue to say that our mission is to ensure that we have a very strong shipping industry that creates economic growth and welfare for the state of Denmark. And then on the other side, that is it's characterized by quality shipping, high level of standard of safety, security, social conditions, protection of environments. That is what we work for. And our function is that we have to be known as a service partner and a competent authority. And that is, so by having this very clear mission, both why we are here, and at the same time, how we should be perceived by our users in a very simple manner. We should be perceived as a service partner and a competent authority. And then I have this as a reference point again and again and again, from the highest strategic level to the very practical day-to-day business, where we address. So are we working as a service partner? Are we do we see ourselves as part of the value chain? Is it competent solutions that we're providing? So I think that's, looking back in the past 10 years, I think that has made a difference, that people are very much aware in very simple strategic targets, objectives. Why are we here? And how are we going, how should we be perceived by, how should we work on a day-to-day business? I mean, how should our users, what kind of experience do we give them? The user experience has to be, like this and that. Yeah.
And how do you go about making changes?
One of the biggest challenges that we are facing, and I assume it's my impression that many organizations work with the same, that this, working across organizational boundaries, that's really a challenge. How to really make teamwork, how to have co-creation, across the organization. That is something that I have spoken about and tried to do something about basically most of my time. But and I think that is probably the biggest challenge, or one of the biggest challenges that we're facing. So if you ask what I do, is that I continue to push for it, and when I see it does not work, I'm very outspoken about it. And so I would say what we have within my organization established a reference point, so that we actually, everybody talk about becoming what I call a generative organization, as in opposition to a bureaucratic organization where you all are very, it's unambiguous. But what I say, that we are living in a very ambiguous, I mean, there's no, you get input from so many sources, and you have to, there's not one solution. We're not working in a linear way. It's very fluffy. The world is so complex. So we have to be what I call a generative organization. That means that we have shared goals, shared mission, shared responsibility. We need to work together to get everybody, all relevant parties need to be on board to find the solutions. And that is very difficult for people, because for some reason it's inherited in us that everybody needs to know what is my responsibility and what is your responsibility.
It sounds like you're very much aware, being on totally different levels at the same time: global, national, regional, risk,
Local.
development, and also inside. You're very much aware of each person being confident in what is needed, whether it's dealing with black swans or whether it's dealing with ensuring that the files are done and should. So having this awareness of all the different, very different processes, even figuring out how to cope with stress in your organization.
Yeah.
I once heard you say, nobody in my system should be hit by stress. How should we address that? That's one of your kind of.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. I said that 10 years ago.
Yes.
It's soon 10 years ago, I think. Yeah. That if you work in DMA in my organization, you shall not be sick of stress. Period.
Yes.
And if it hits you anyway, then there's something we, as the organization, there's something that we haven't done good enough.
Yeah, you call it a systemic stress strategy.
It's just, I mean, if you want to have people that buy in, that really, they're all in, they're committed, then you also need to, as part of the framework, you need to make sure that they are actually that they thrive. And part of that is that they don't get stress. And if they don't thrive and they get stress or something else, then as an organization, you need to say the organization needs to do something about it. So if we have stress, if a person gets sick from stress, and it can come in 1,000 different symptoms. But what I found out years back was that very often people started to say, "Oh, there's something also, oh, you got a divorce last month, right? So that's probably it." And that's all. It was very much external explanations. And then I compared it to the fact that if people came Monday morning and said, "Oh, my back really, really hurts," yeah, then people didn't say, "Oh, but you played basketball yesterday." On the opposite, they say, "Okay, we need to get somebody to help you. We fix the table." So we just need to have, it's the same mindset. So if you have stress, it's like, what can we do for you? This is something we need to do. So we need to take care of you in the acute phase, make sure that you get well again. But we also need to look at why did this happen? So we have this systemic approach. At first, we need to get the staff member, the team member, out of the acute phase, and then afterwards we have a systemic approach where we have a dialogue between the person's manager and an external consultant, which is a psychologist, and then we talk about. We establish a dialogue on, so what are we going to do so this will not happen again? And I should say it's not just about removing paper from your desktop or giving you different or a less amount of work. It's very much about, it can be unclear expectations, it can be misunderstood targets, it can be conflicts with a colleague, conflicts with the boss. It can be so many different things that actually puts the person into a state of stress.
Could you speak a little bit more about how you work with culture in general within the organization?
I'm a firm believer that you cannot change culture. As a manager, and I think for me that's really, when many years ago, I think I realized you cannot change what is inside people, and but what you can work with is behavior. I can only address behavior. So when I interpret and say, oh, that's our culture, then I have to ask myself, what kind of behavior is it that I see? And I really try to teach myself to not talk about mindset or attitude or perception. We need to have a different perception. And everybody will say, yes, we need to have a different perception. But that doesn't create a different perception. But you can only talk about behavior. So I try to say, what kind of behavior is it that we need in organization? We need to work together. We need to have an open dialogue together. We need to have people that do not become ill. So if somebody becomes ill, what is it that we need to do? What kind of behavior should we have? So it's very important to talk about actions and behavior, because that's the only thing, that's my firm belief as a manager and as a leader, that you can address behavior.
So taking an example, what you mentioned before about working across boundaries, then,
yes.
Then what kind of expectations or what do you ask?
So when I see, and I say, and I've been very outspoken about this, I say our biggest challenge is that we are extremely bureaucratic. So we're very much sort of focused on my domain, your domain. And so it's very much going by the book. And I see it, for instance, that if we have a problem that comes up, some kind of challenge that we have, a ship somewhere, something has happened, some question arises, then instead of very often we see a tendency that instead of people across sections, across departments, sit down together and say, so what are we looking at here? How should we cope? Then very much it's like, okay, we will start. So in one department, they do what they can, and then they send it to another department, and then work on. And I say that, for me, it's like, if you really manage co-creation and actually working together and solving problems together, then you will find out that 1 + 1 is more than 2. So that's a way I work with it. I address when I see behavior, and when I see the result of a behavior which is not, in my mind, it's not the optimal way of doing things. I simply just I talk about it in a respectful manner.
What good advice would you give a young person who is aspiring into leadership? What should a young person be aware of?
Personally, I think there's too much focus on being much more competent in strategic analysis, and defining, making plans for change management and innovation. But I think what's really important is to work with yourself. How do you impact your surroundings? What's your executive presence? You need to know everybody have another side of the coin, and you need to look at the other side of the coin. You need to get behind the mirror and say, so how do I look? Where are my dark sides, and work with them? I mean, you need to know your strengths, but definitely also if you have, I wouldn't say weaknesses, but again, things that can be a challenge. For instance, for myself, I have a very strong passion. So and I have personally struggled with, people often can become very much afraid, because they think if I'm very passionate about something, it can even sometimes seems like anger. But by working with becoming much more aware of that, I mean, I'm still me, but it's something that you need to be aware of. So I personally think if you really want to excel and succeed in top management, I think your primary focus should be on yourself, your personal coping, and your personal appearance, and your personal performance. How do you influence, and how do you impact your surroundings, the people that are around you? So my advice, if I sounding like an old man, if I should give advice to younger people, I would say, don't be so concerned about working out strategies. I mean, we eat strategies for breakfast. What you really need to do is to really have a personal focus on yourself, and you need to have people around you that are capable of giving you personal feedback.
Capable and dare to do it.
Dare to do, yeah.
Yeah.
And if you don't have people around you that dare to do, you need to go and buy someone, a coach or whatever. You need to have people really. You need to get these personal input. Yeah.
So you negotiate with people who are from very different backgrounds, cultures, countries.
Yes.
And I heard you talk about the importance of that level playing fields, those frameworks. And I was wondering, how are your values coming from Denmark, coming from the West, you could say? Are they a strength when you are in those negotiations?
I would say so, definitely. But I think also that it is a strength. And I think that I mean, I think that we as Danes around, at least that's what I meet and my experience is, that we are known for we are very upfront, but they can also count on us. I mean, we are very honest. A word is a word. So there's now a famous saying in shipping is our word is our bond. But we are also very good at making relations. And I think that's one of the biggest strengths for Danes, and in particular in the maritime domain. The world's best merchants, that's the maritime people of Denmark, the shipping people of Denmark. We have been making business around the world for centuries. And that's because we're very good at doing business, but we're also very good in creating relations, meeting people eye to eye. And not just, I mean, if you're together with people from a different culture, then of course, I mean, I'm Danish still, but I also need to, I mean, you need to connect and you need to meet people and I think that's very important. And then sometimes, I will share with you, Stephane, to be honest, I mean, that was something I needed to learn. I mean, I had an international negotiation once, and I was very Danish in an intervention where I was completely without filter. I said exactly what I meant. And everything, I mean, I was in a room with many people, everybody became silent. It was like, really, and I said, okay, this was maybe not the best. So the next day I took the word again, and then I was really, I was sort of more formulating in much more diplomatic. And then a very good friend of me, he went up to me, he was actually Korean, and he said, much more diplomatic today. And actually it ended up with me getting my will, because, okay, now it's like this. Now we understand what you're saying. So I think that we need to be very firm on what we believe in, and we are very honest on what we work for, and we argue ourselves. But you also need to sometimes you need to connect, you need to create relations, and also need to sometimes be outspoken about that you actually understand the other side's viewpoint. I mean, you don't have to agree, but you can understand it. And I think that's very important when you negotiate and you have to get the ends to meet. And I'm not talking commercial negotiations, but more political or regulation or rules, or can we get access to this? I think the most important part is to actually understand the concerns on the other side of the table.
That you are actually in it together.
Yeah, exactly. And then in every negotiation, I think that goes regardless of what you negotiate about, commercial things or regulatory things or whatever, you need to bring something to the table. You always need to bring something to the other side. Yeah. Start by giving a gift.
That's super interesting, because on one hand, there is that humility, self-knowledge, humility to meet that high level and not, and then that aspect, because you can't create a common ground if you don't understand each other. But that's true, that is very often skipped in a sense. So that makes that distinction, I think, is fundamental.
Because that means that if you have a meeting that doesn't run very well, that's because you have sort of just listed up your position and there's no common ground, there's no opening. So you're just sitting on two sides. I say A, you say B, and that's it.